All right, now let's talk to Corbin Trent. He is the former communications director for AOC and for Just Democrats. He's also the founder of No Excuses PAC, co-host of Building the Dream podcast. Corbin, welcome, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me. How are you?
Good, good. So Corbin, let's talk about the future and the past. I'm going to ask you about the most important progressive races left in the primary season. But first, let's start with what have been the biggest wins so far?
I mean, I think the biggest one so far in terms of garnering attention would probably be Fetterman in the PA Senate race. I think Summer Lee, also in PA for a House seat there, was a huge win. There's several in Texas that are kind of, I think Greg Casar is going to be he's going to be the next congressman from Texas 35. I think that's a big win. They're starting to build up. They're starting to really, I think, gain some momentum. The squad, or whatever you want to call it, is definitely growing. That ideology seems to be winning some of these primaries. Obviously, we're not winning them all. Senator Nina Turner lost her race there. A bunch of folks, we saw AIPAC pouring money into North Carolina, all across the country. But then I think, there's a couple like Jamie McLeod Skinner in Oregon beat a long-term incumbent, kind of AOC fashion, running on progressive ideas and sort of Medicare for all, stuff like that. So I mean, there's quite a bit of wins happening, and I think they're just going to be we're going to be getting more and more as we go along. So I think even with Fetterman's health scare and everything, we saw that happen last week or two. I think he's going to be able to pull out a win. I think Lucas Coons. That's the future, right? We haven't gotten to the future yet. So, but yeah, I think there's some really exciting things happening out there.
All right, hold on, Lucas, because that is interesting. There's actually a middle ground between the past and the future because one race is still in a recount, and that's Jessica Cisneros versus Cuellar, and she's down by about 170 votes, and then that's so close that you have no idea which way the recount's going to go. But if Cuellar does wind up pulling it out, it almost certainly has to be because Pelosi and Clyburn stepped in to legitimize him so that he didn't seem like he was a guy under FBI investigation that would definitely lose the general election for them, but he seemed like a credible member of the Democratic Party. Do you think that probably made the biggest difference
even in this world? I mean, I think that, that's one of the things I've been kind of surprised about this cycle is seeing how close some of these races are. I think there was a Texas 23 race that looks like it's going to go towards a progressive with like 23 votes. Summer Lee we mentioned in Pennsylvania, obviously a very narrow margin, less than 500, I think, is going to be the final count. Jessica's down by less than 200. Seeing these things so close means that every single phone call was made, every door that was knocked, every ad that was run, every bit of earned media, and yes, every bit of Pelosi and Clyburn and all these other schmucks going out there and legitimizing people that, are basically not Democrats. I mean, even in this sort of convoluted, weird scenario where Democrats are right now, where there is no real ideology that sort of defines a Democrat. What is a Democrat? Who knows? I still think Cuellar ought not be the person you're backing in this sort of way. But there they are. Nancy's going to back her incumbent, she says. So we'll see if that's the case with some of these other incumbents that are getting primaried.
She of course did not back. She of course did not back Ed Markey, who was an incumbent in the Senate, because he was progressive and for the Green New Deal, and so she's a hypocrite. And by the way, if Cuellar wins the recount and he loses the general election, that will be 100% Nancy Pelosi's fault and Jim Clyburn's fault, and not a single person in the mainstream media will make note of that. Not one, I guarantee it ahead of time. No. You could email this clip to every
people are taking bets on that.
Washington,
let's lay it down.
And they still wouldn't do it. They still wouldn't mention it.
No.
So
it doesn't fit the narrative for that they want to tell, which is that she's this sort of master statesman and stateswoman, this master architect of the Democratic Party, and that's for whatever reason that's the story they want to tell. So
yeah, I know what the reason is because she's takes the most amount of corporate money. All right, so master legislator, she could barely put together 2 sentences. Anyways, so we're going to talk about communications in a second because that's your expertise. But tell me about Lucas Coons and some of the more exciting races coming up.
So I mean, so Lucas Coons is running in Missouri for Senate. right? This is a he's running in a primary. They just had this sort of billionaire heiress jump in the race because he's looking good. He's looking like he's going to win the primary. And in some of the polling, he's within 6 points of the person that's leading the Republican primary. So he's got, and the funny thing is, like, all these states that we just assume can never be held by progressives or held, even by Democrats. These states, used to be solid blue states in some cases, and even Claire McCaskill held that Senate seat for a little while until she decided to be, full bore corporate. Tennessee, where I'm from, Al Gore's from here, West Virginia. It was a super majority Democratic state house for a long time. These places that we've given up on as a party, they were democratically held within, the last 15, 20 years. It's not, we're not talking about going back to the Depression era. This is something that's, less than 20 years old. And, I think Lucas has got this kind of interesting way about him. He's a former military man. He's got that sort of rugged man, masculine thing happening, but also he's a solid blue Democrat in all the ways you'd think. He's pro-choice, but then he's got a way of talking about the economics that have sort of devastated, the Rust Belts, devastated Missouri, and how we've sort of sold the farm off over the past 30, 40 years and let businesses sort of globalize. We've let this supply chain get away from us, and sort of the impacts that that's having on communities there in Missouri and across the country. And I think that that's, maybe the way to start talking about this. But then in more than that, he's talking about how energy independence through renewables, through building stuff in America again is the path to it. Similar, I think, vein to what Tim Ryan's attempting to do, except I think he's got a little bit more je ne sais quoi, or whatever that quality is that lets people be kind of appealing than, in my opinion, than Tim Ryan does. But hopefully Tim will win in Ohio too. So.
And plus, Lucas Coons is more of a populist than a progressive. Tim Ryan is a corporate Democrat with the veneer of,
seems kind of full of it sometimes.
Rhetoric of middle class without really backing it up. Obviously Tim Ryan would be infinitely better than J.D. Vance. I don't want anybody to get it mistaken. He's just not overly progressive. I
think he'd even be a little bit better than a handful of these folks, even like than a lot of these Democrats that have been running. But obviously, I think what we're looking at right now, unfortunately, is a map that's sort of stacked against us, and it looks like the House may, end up in Republican hands. We've got a handful of. That's why I think that this is a cycle that even if we lose the House, it's still a place where progressives can build power. You got Keena Collins running Illinois 7 against Bobby Rush. I think that could be one of those sort of sleeper races that people aren't paying attention to. Amy Villela, obviously, is coming up in Nevada. And then there's, a bunch of really interesting folks running in California. And, that's obviously this, top two primary, right? So if folks if they advance to the top two, then they're going to the general. Or you got David Kim in 34, in California 34, running against Jimmy Gomez. Now, Jimmy Gomez isn't the sort of representative that you'd think, oh, this is a guy we got to go after. He's basically progressive as far as the way he votes, but he's not out there really trying to build anything. And I think David Kim, this is his, I think, second, maybe third run. He came within 4 or 5 points last time in the general of unseating Jimmy. And then you've seen really ramping up of attack ads and mailers that are going after. I think my guess is their campaign sees some possibilities in November. So I think that's an interesting race too.
Okay, so Corbin, being former communications director for AOC and Just Democrats, let me ask you about communications. So is there one thing that you would counsel progressive candidates to do in their communications that you don't necessarily see that often?
I was talking with one of the Senate campaigns today, and one of the things that I was identifying as, at least what I think is part of the problem, is that people don't really see voters don't see a path to any of the stuff that they're selling becoming true. right? So the message is really good in a lot of cases. Even Tim Ryan's message of competing with China or rebuilding our infrastructure, rebuilding our reshoring our supply chain. Lucas Coons. There's a lot of folks that are doing this sort of more rebuild America's economic engine kind of message, right? But I think one of the disconnects is the reality. Right now Democrats have a trifecta basically, and nothing's happening, right? So there's this, I think, disbelief that the Democrats can do anything, even if they have power. And I think also you're coming up against this disbelief that the federal government can be effective. We've just gone through the pandemic where we've largely been, incapable of dealing with that, supply chain, blah, 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 healthcare, all the problems that we're having. And I think one of the things that I've been trying to get folks to do is rekindle people's imagination that the government is something that we can control a little bit, right? That we can have some input on, and that can direct us in a way, right? We can actually move in a direction deliberately. I think, and you talk about working in the former offices, people hated when I brought up Ronald Reagan, but I think Ronald Reagan was really good at painting a picture of America, right? Painting a picture of a future. And Republicans in general are good at that. They're good at painting pictures of problems and an enemy, but they're also good at painting a picture of that their base wants to see of a future, right? Now, largely it's not the future we want to see, but they can see it, And I think that's one of the things that we've not been able to connect with voters largely as a party is this sort of what do Democrats want to do, right? What is going to be different? What, like we keep talking about this damn bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed, right? Well, I've had to replace a couple rims on my car this year because I've run over potholes. I was just looking at a viral thing that came through out of Memphis where a guy's standing in a pothole up to his waist, right? I mean, so they say, oh, we just spent 60 billion, 80 billion, however many billion it was. And I don't think people feel that at all in their lives, right? So that's the other thing we've got to do is either, wouldn't it be great if the person at the top of the ticket, Joe Biden, instead of going around the country talking about how great Republicans are, was actually out there selling an alternative vision and trying to impact people's lives in a tangible way. But short of that, I think it's just about, my theory on it is create something, a message, a vision that people can see, right? And that's one of the things I thought was so powerful about Donald Trump. Again, to go back to a Republican example, is the simplicity of a wall, the simplicity of, immigrants taking jobs. All these things were easy to imagine, right? I mean, like, I remember standing in line at the grocery store, listening to people complain about somebody using food stamps. And that's like, the reason people don't like food stamps is because you can picture it, right? You can picture this person buying a lobster tail, or whatever this fantasy is that you have of what people are doing with food stamps instead of feeding their family. And it's easy to imagine. And we've yet to be able to paint that picture, I think, in an effective way.
Yeah. So. Here's one way to go. Say, hey, we're against corporate rule. The big businesses that are crushing you and taking away, your wages and your health care, et cetera. We're actually going to be protectors of the people. Wish us luck.
And yeah, if Joe Manchin's going to go out there and cry because we mentioned his name in a press, this recent thing I'm reading now is that I think it was Jeff Stein, Washington Post, is saying that sort of recounting how the Build Back Better thing.
We lost him there for a sec. Okay. Well, good news is we talked about Jeff Stein and what an awful article that was earlier today. So we certainly agree on that. All right. So it's okay. We were out of time anyway. Corbin, Trent.
These people that.
Yeah, Corbin, we lost you there. Say the point about Manchin.
Oh, no.
It's okay. Say the point about Manchin.
Yeah, So I was just reading an article the other day. I think Jeff Stein wrote it in the Washington Post about sort of why the Build Back Better negotiations failed, something that could have tangibly impacted people's lives. And the real culprit seems to be that Joe Manchin got his feelings hurt. The White House puts out this press statement saying something about Joe Manchin, and then why things had been slowing down with getting Build Back Better out. And he flipped his lid. He got so angry that he walked away from the table, declared that he wouldn't vote for it. This is something that was going to put, charging stations all across the country, put in money for factories that are building rare earth mining, minerals, all sorts of things that was going to work to help build back an economy in this country that was functional in a substantial and tangible way. And Joe Manchin decides that his feelings are way more important than the American people. And I think if the Democratic Party could regain the courage that maybe it had with FDR, I don't even know when the last time we had it was, to really call out the folks in this party that are really holding up the line, I think that would give people a little bit of faith too. There's things that we can do to let people know whose team we're on. Like, you were alluding earlier that, talking about Speaker Pelosi, Nancy's, we know she's not on our team. She's not on my team. She's on your team, right? She's on the oligarchs team. She's on corporate, big corporations team, and she's on her own team, right? And I think people feel that, they sense that. And the Democratic Party has gotten too far afield in whose team they're on. They've absolutely sided with the corporations, with the bankers, and with everybody else other than the working families across the country. And I think they got to change that.
And progressives have to be clear that they're not on that team. Progressives should never, ever be confused for Nancy Pelosi, because that will be the death of progressivism if that happens. We have to distance ourselves from the toxic corporate Democrats as quickly as possible. All right, we got to go. Corbin, Trent, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.